In a small Texas town, where the air often smelled faintly of oil and rain, Jake worked quietly in his modest garage. Everyone in town knew him as the man who could fix anything with wheels, from battered tractors to vintage motorcycles. His hands were calloused, his overalls permanently stained, but his eyes held the kind of steady kindness that made people trust him instantly. That rainy afternoon, the sound of an engine far too refined for his usual clientele rumbled outside. Jake looked up from under the hood of a pickup just as a sleek black limousine rolled to a stop. The door opened, and a tall, sharply dressed woman stepped out, Evelyn Carter, whose name appeared in business magazines and financial news. Behind her, a young woman in her early 20s emerged slowly, seated in a wheelchair. Her auburn hair was pulled back neatly, but her eyes looked tired. Rain dotted her lap. Blanket, as Evelyn guided her toward the open garage. "Mr. Jake?" Evelyn's voice wavered, unusual for someone of her stature. "We've been to every specialist, every doctor, and no one can build what my daughter needs." Jake wiped his hands on a rag, studying the chair. The motorized wheels struggled to respond, the frame too heavy for someone of Emma's slight build. Evelyn explained that Emma had lost the ability to walk after an accident 3 years ago, and while she could use her arms, most chairs were either too bulky or too fragile for her daily life. Jake crouched down beside Emma, his voice calm. "Let me take a look," he said, fingers tracing the worn gears. "Give me 2 days, and I'll have something better for you." For most, that promise would have sounded impossible, but Jake wasn't most people. Once they left, he rolled the broken chair to the center of the shop and began dismantling it piece by piece. The rain outside drummed steadily on the tin roof, mixing with the hum of his tools. Sparks flew from his welding torch, casting bursts of light across his face. He worked deep into the night, his mind running through designs that could give Emma more than mobility, it could give her independence. The next morning, Jake visited the local supply store, scanning aisles for lightweight yet durable materials. He purchased aircraft-grade aluminum for the frame, precision bearings for smooth turns, and a new battery system that could be recharged faster than standard models. Back in the shop, he laid everything out on his workbench, blueprints forming in his head. Every cut, every weld was done with careful consideration for Emma's comfort and control. As the hours passed, Jake's world narrowed to the chair before him. He modified the seat to perfectly match Emma's posture, reinforced the armrests without adding weight, and rewired the controls for a more intuitive response. Grease smudged his cheek and sweat dripped onto the cold concrete floor, but each adjustment brought the design closer to his vision. Something sleek, strong, and easy to maneuver even for someone with limited strength. He barely noticed the passing of time as daylight faded once again. On the second evening, Jake stood back and admired the nearly finished work. The chair's frame gleamed softly under the shop's overhead lights, its wheels smooth and perfectly aligned. He added custom grips to the controls, knowing Emma's hands might tire easily. He tested it himself, rolling across the shop floor, spinning in tight circles and feeling the responsiveness he'd built into every component. There was still fine-tuning to do, but already the machine felt alive, ready to restore a piece of someone's life. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Jake lay awake thinking about Emma's face, the way her eyes had been guarded, almost resigned. He thought about Evelyn, her commanding presence dimmed by helplessness over her daughter's condition. He wasn't just building a chair, he was building a chance for Emma to move without asking for help, a chance for her to feel the freedom most people took for granted. By dawn, he was back in the shop, tightening bolts and polishing the frame until it shone. When the appointed day arrived, Jake felt a quiet mix of pride and nervousness. The limousine returned, gliding through puddles as rain clouds began to break. Evelyn stepped out first, her gaze scanning the garage. Emma followed, her blanket tucked neatly, her expression curious but cautious. Jake wheeled the finished chair toward them, its metallic finish catching the morning light. "Ready to try it?" he asked. his tone gentle but confident. Emma glanced at her mother, who nodded, encouragingly. Slowly, she transferred from her old chair into Jake's creation. Her hands rested on the controls, hesitating for a heartbeat. Then, with a light press, the chair glided forward smoothly. Emma's eyes widened. She turned, testing the responsiveness, and found the movement effortless. She spun in a slow circle, the mechanics whisper quiet. Her lips trembled as she looked up at Jake. I can actually do this," she whispered. Evelyn's hands covered her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time in years, Emma's motion was her own, without strain, without frustration. Jake watched quietly, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He didn't need thanks, though Emma's tearful smile was thanks. "Enough!" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice unsteady. "You don't know what this means to us," she said. Jake shrugged lightly, though his throat tightened. "Sometimes all it takes is the right set of tools," he replied. The rain had stopped completely now, sunlight filtering through the open garage door, dust motes drifting in the golden beams. It felt like the whole world had paused to witness this moment. Emma rolled toward the threshold of the garage, the wheels moving easily over the uneven ground. Outside, the air smelled fresh after the rain. She turned the chair toward the small slope leading to the street and, with a careful push, guided herself down without hesitation. Jake followed at a distance, watching her confidence grow with every... By the time she reached the sidewalk, her smile had widened into pure joy. Evelyn stood beside him, still wiping at her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given her freedom." For Jake, it was more than just a job. He knew the chair would change Emma's daily life, make her errands possible, her movements independent, but he also understood something deeper. In his line of work, fixing broken things was second nature, yet here he had fixed something invisible, something that didn't show in metal or bolts. He had mended a spirit worn down by years of limitation. That thought stayed with him long after the limousine drove away, Emma's face glowing in the rear window. Back inside the garage, the workbench was cluttered with scraps, unused bolts, and smudged notes. Jake leaned on it, exhaling slowly. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed softer now. Outside, sunlight pooled across the wet pavement. He knew this wasn't the last time he would take on a project like this. Somewhere out there, others needed more than repairs. They needed someone willing to see possibility where others saw only problems. And Jake was ready, always, to be that someone. A week later, Jake received an unexpected call from Evelyn, asking him to visit her sprawling Texas estate. He assumed it was to collect the remaining payment for his work, so he dusted off his boots and drove the old pickup along the winding road leading to her home. As he stepped out, the scent of fresh roses greeted him, and in the distance he spotted Emma by the fountain. She wasn't in the wheelchair. Instead, she leaned on a polished wooden cane, her radiant smile brighter than the afternoon sun. Jake froze in place, almost doubting what he saw. Emma, who had once needed help with every small movement, was now standing tall, her hair catching the breeze. "You didn't just fix my chair," she said, warmly, stepping toward him before wrapping him in a hug. "You gave me my life back." Her voice trembled, yet her grip was strong. Evelyn approached, her heels clicking softly against the stone path, eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Jake," Evelyn began, her voice heavy with emotion. "You've done what world-class specialists, therapists, and engineers could not. You gave my daughter something priceless. I don't just want to thank you, I want to invest in you. I want to fund your own workshop so you can give this freedom to others like Emma." The words struck him like a wave, overwhelming and unexpected. He had spent years fixing engines for survival, not imagining a future beyond his small garage. Jake's hands, still calloused from years of work, twitched nervously at his sides. "Mom, I don't know what to say." His voice cracked under the weight of emotions he couldn't name. Evelyn smiled, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Say yes. You have a gift, Jake, and the world needs more people like you, people who work with their hearts, not just their hands. Emma nodded eagerly, her eyes sparkling, as if she were seeing her life unfold anew right in front of her. As they spoke, a light Texas breeze rustled through the magnolia trees surrounding the estate. The sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the driveway. Emma walked slowly, her cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement, matching Jake's steps beside her. Each movement was deliberate, each step a triumph against years of limitation. Jake's chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the quiet pride of seeing his work transform someone's life in such a profound way. They reached the edge of the fountain, where the water sparkled under the sunset. Evelyn gestured for them to sit, and servants brought sweet tea on a silver tray. "I've already spoken to my financial advisors," she continued. "If you accept, you'll have everything you need. Equipment, staff, and a space large enough to handle any kind of mobility project. I don't just want you fixing what's broken, Jake. I want you building what's never existed before." Her conviction was unshakable, and Jake felt the pull of something larger than himself. Still, doubt lingered. He thought about his tiny rented garage, his battered toolbox, and the bills stacked on his kitchen counter. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a CEO. He was just a mechanic. "I wouldn't know where to start," he admitted softly. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "You already started, Jake, when you refused to give up on me." Her words cut through his uncertainty, planting the seed of belief he didn't know he needed. That evening, Evelyn gave him a tour of the property, showing him a large, unused barn at the far edge. Its high ceilings and sturdy beams could easily be transformed into a state-of-the-art workshop. Jake ran his hands over the weathered wood, imagining rows of workbenches, shelves of tools, and people from all over coming to reclaim their independence. For the first time in years, his dreams began to take shape not as impossible ideas, but as plans within reach. By the time they returned to the main house, the sky was painted in deep shades of orange and purple. The air carried the faint hum of crickets, and the fountain's gentle splash filled the quiet. Evelyn handed him a folder. Inside were detailed blueprints for the workshop and a preliminary budget. She had thought of everything from specialized equipment to housing for patients traveling from out of state. "I want this to be your legacy, Jake," she said. "Not just a job, but a calling." Jake didn't answer immediately. He walked to where Emma stood, watching the sunset with a serene smile. "How's it feel?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head. "Like I'm finally part of the world again. Like I'm not just watching life happen to other people." Her voice broke slightly, and Jake's throat tightened. "Then let's make sure others feel the same," he said at last, turning back to Evelyn. "I'm in." The simple words seemed to lift the air around them. Over the next hour, they discussed timelines and plans. Evelyn promised to handle the legal and financial details, leaving Jake to focus solely on the technical side. "I'll find the best engineers, welders, and designers," she said, "but you'll lead them. Every project will have your fingerprints on it." Jake felt an unfamiliar surge of purpose. For years, his skills had been confined to fixing cars and motorcycles. Now, those same skills could give people the ability to walk, move, and live fully again. Before he left that night, Emma insisted on walking him to his truck. Her steps were slow but steady, each one echoing with determination. "I still use the chair. Sometimes," she admitted, "but now I choose when, and that's the difference you made." Jake smiled, his voice low. "Keep choosing, Emma. Every day." They stood for a moment in the cool night air. The stars beginning to appear above. There was no rush. Some silences were meant to be kept. As Jake drove back to his small apartment, the road ahead felt different, wider, brighter, full of possibilities. He thought about the faces of people he might help, the lives he could touch. For so long, he had measured success by the cars he repaired and the paychecks he collected. Now, he understood success could be something far greater, giving someone the chance to reclaim their life. And it all began with one repaired wheelchair and the courage to see beyond the obvious. The following week, renovations began on the barn. Jake spent long days overseeing construction, selecting tools, and recruiting a small but passionate team. Word spread quickly, and soon letters began arriving from families across the country, each one carrying a story of struggle and hope. Jake read every letter carefully, picturing the people behind them. Some had been told they'd never walk again, others needed specialized mobility devices that didn't yet exist. Every request became a new challenge, and Jake was determined to meet them all. Emma visited often, offering suggestions and sharing her own experience. Her laughter filled the workshop as she tested prototypes, giving candid feedback and reminding everyone that this work wasn't about machines, it was about people. Evelyn handled the business side with precision, ensuring they had the resources to keep growing. For Jake, every day brought new obstacles, but also new victories. And as the first completed, projects rolled out the workshop doors, he realized the truth. Miracles didn't just happen, they were built, piece by piece. With grease-stained hands, Jake's new workshop sat on the edge of town, a wide steel building with tall glass panels that let sunlight flood inside. Evelyn's funding had turned his modest garage into a state-of-the-art facility, equipped with tools and machines he had once only dreamed of. The air was filled with the scent of polished metal and fresh paint, and the hum of machinery blended with quiet conversations. Veterans with missing limbs tested prosthetics, children rolled in on broken chairs and left with something new, and accident survivors found independence again. Every day, the walls echoed with stories of resilience. On one wall, Jake had started hanging photographs, each one a face he'd helped. Smiling kids in bright-colored chairs, elderly veterans saluting him in gratitude, parents hugging their children after seeing them move freely again. It became more than decoration. It was a living reminder of why he worked long hours without complaint. For Jake, this wasn't business, it was a mission. Evelyn often visited, bringing donations and introducing him to people in need, but she never took credit. She always said, "This is your work, Jake. I just gave you the tools." One quiet morning, the shop was filled with the usual rhythm of productivity welding sparks, the whir of drills, and the distant clatter of metal. Jake was bent over a frame for a custom wheelchair when the bell over the door rang. He glanced up and froze. Emma walked in, not wheeled, not leaning heavily on a cane, but stepping forward with measured, confident strides. She wore a sleek, lightweight brace Jake had recently built for her. Her smile was brighter than any sunrise he'd ever seen. "Guess what?" she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Jake set down his tools and walked toward her, trying to hide the swell of emotion in his chest. "What?" he asked, though he suspected she had something big to share. Emma's eyes sparkled as she spoke. "I signed up for a charity walk next month, and you," she pointed at him with playful authority, "are coming with me." Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief, but the pride in his gaze was unmistakable. Training for the walk became a shared project. After shop hours, Jake and Emma would circle the block, each lap bringing her a little more endurance. Some nights, her muscles trembled and her steps slowed, but she refused to quit. Jake never pushed too hard, but he always encouraged her to keep going. "Every step is one you didn't have yesterday," he would say, and she would nod, holding on to that truth. Their bond grew even stronger. Word spread about the upcoming charity event, especially when people learned Emma Carter would be participating. Walking, not riding. Reporters began calling, local TV stations requested interviews, and soon the story caught national interest. Jake felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had never been one for cameras or praise, but Evelyn gently reminded him, "This isn't about you, it's about showing the world what's possible." And deep down he knew she was right. Inspiration had to be seen to spread. The day of the charity walk dawned bright and warm, with the Texas sky stretching endlessly overhead. The event grounds bustled with participants, supporters, volunteers, and journalists holding cameras. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of fresh coffee and breakfast tacos drifted through the air. Emma arrived in athletic gear, her brace snug beneath her leggings, her determination etched into every line of her face. Jake stood beside her, wearing his usual work boots and a simple shirt, feeling strangely out of place in the crowd. As they lined up at the starting point, Evelyn stood just behind them, her hands clasped over her heart. "You ready?" Jake asked quietly. Emma grinned. "I've been ready for months." The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, counting down. The starting horn sounded, and the crowd surged forward. Jake matched his pace to Emma's, letting her lead, his eyes scanning her movements with both pride and protective instinct. Cameras flashed, capturing each determined step. The first half-mile was steady, with Emma chatting and laughing between breaths. But midway through, her smile wavered, and sweat beaded on her forehead. Jake leaned in and murmured, "You've got this, one step at a time." She nodded, her jaw tightening, and pressed on. The crowd lining the course erupted in cheers each time they passed, strangers shouting her name and holding handmade signs. It wasn't just a walk anymore, it was a celebration of grit, of defiance against limits. As they approached the final stretch, the noise swelled. The finish line came into view, draped with streamers, photographers kneeling on either side to capture the moment. Emma's steps slowed briefly, and Jake instinctively extended his hand, not to pull her, but to walk with her side by side. She took it, and together they crossed under the banner. Flashbulbs popped. The announcer declared her name and called Jake the mechanic who builds miracles. The crowd roared, and Evelyn wept openly, unashamed of her tears. Reporters swarmed almost immediately, microphones shoved forward, questions flying. "Jake, how does it feel to see your work change lives like this?" one asked. He shrugged lightly, glancing at Emma. "It's not about my work, it's about their will. I just build the tools. They're the ones who do the hard part." Emma squeezed his arm, grinning through tears. "Don't let him fool you. He's changed more lives than he'll ever admit." Evelyn nodded, her own pride shining through. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of interviews, photographs, and handshakes. Jake wasn't used to being called a hero, but every time he looked at Emma, standing tall, brace hidden under her jeans, he thought maybe the word fit in ways he'd never considered. That night back at the workshop, he hung a new photograph on the wall. Emma crossing the finish line, sunlight streaming over her, their clasped hands raised in victory. It became his favorite image, a symbol of what he wanted to keep doing for the rest of his life. Requests for help began pouring in after the charity walk, emails, letters, and phone calls from people across the country. Parents wrote about children born with mobility challenges. Veterans shared stories of injuries that had taken their independence, and doctors reached out curious about his methods. Jake could have charged high prices and turned his work into a profitable empire, but he refused. "This shop runs on purpose, not profit," he told Evelyn one afternoon. She only smiled. "Then we'll make sure it never runs out of purpose." Months passed, and the workshop became a landmark in the small town, a place where hope was built as tangibly as machines. Volunteers came from nearby cities to learn from Jake, offering their own skills. A retired engineer taught him new design techniques. A seamstress made custom seat cushions for his wheelchairs. School students, inspired by Emma's story, came after classes to help with sanding, painting, and delivering finished devices. It wasn't just Jake's mission anymore, it was a community effort. Emma visited often, sometimes to help, sometimes just to talk. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the shop in golden light, she leaned against the workbench and said, "Do you ever think about where this all started?" Jake smiled faintly. A rainy day, a broken chair, and a stranger who wouldn't take no for an answer. She laughed softly. "Best rainy day of my life." The sound of her laughter filled the workshop, warm and familiar, and Jake thought to himself that some moments were worth more than all the money in the world. He didn't care for the fame or the title the reporters had given him. What mattered was the joy on Emma's face, the relief in a parent's eyes when they saw their child move freely, the quiet gratitude in a veteran's handshake. Fixing machines would always be his trade, but fixing lives, restoring dignity, hope, and possibility had become his true calling. And as long as there were people who needed him, Jake knew one thing for certain: he wasn't stopping. Not now, not ever.